Alrighty, we're going.
All right. So hello, everyone that's joined us. Thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you who are here to get credit for Texan Critics, Ray mentioned in the chat box that once this lecture is done, we'll send you guys a link in that chat box, and then you can click on that link, and once you click on it, it will immediately give you credit that can be recorded onto your co-curricular record. We'll also do another reminder at the very end, but this is just a quick reminder at the beginning. So unfortunately, Lauren Birdrather is not able to join us tonight due to some technical difficulties, but we have a very exciting lecture tonight with Dr. Kristin Ruppel, Dani Morrison, and Tim Scheel. We're just going to get started with a bit of introduction. So Kristin Ruppel is an associate professor of Native American Studies at MSU and director of Native Land Project. Her training in anthropology, botany, and conservation biology led to a focus on the United States civilization policies and their ongoing consequences for American Indian allotted landowners. Her first book, Unearthing Indian Land, Living with the Legacies of Allotment, was published in 2008 and by the University of Arizona Press. Next, we have Dani Morrison, who's an enrolled Oglala Lakota tribal member and native Montanan working on her master's degree through the Native American Studies Department. Dani has worked the past decade in service to tribal communities with an emphasis on equitable education and health services in Indian country, which is how she began working with the Indigenous Research Initiative. And then next we have Tim Scheel, who grew up in the Chicago suburbs before moving to Montana in 2004. Over the next 15 years, he worked in adolescent treatment around Missoula, completed a bachelor's degree in philosophy at the University of Montana, began graduate school as a philosophy student, but then finished as an MSW through the Department of Social Work. Recently, Tim began work in the PhD program in American Studies at MSU, where he is now adrift and rudderless in his second year. It's here that he has been very lucky to connect with conservations and efforts led by the Indigenous Research Initiative. So thank you, Kristin, Dani, and Tim for joining us this evening and sharing your knowledge with us about the Indigenous Research Initiative. So please welcome Kristin and Dani and Tim.
Of course, thank you so much. Appreciate it. So do you want me to go?
Yeah, totally forgot I had to share that screen. Sorry about that.
So I'll just go ahead and start while Olivia's getting the PowerPoint going. Of course, we've got to have the PowerPoint presentation. It just wouldn't be a meeting without that. So thank you so much, Olivia, and all of the rest of the crew at Honors Presents for this kind invitation, and we're super sorry that Lauren Birdrather wasn't able to join us, although he may be lurking out there. I'm not sure. Sometimes he's able to just call in, and hopefully he'll let us know if he is. But nonetheless, this is work that wouldn't be possible without our partnership, and so I'd like to just acknowledge not only that partnership and the work that we have been doing together now for a number of years, as well as to acknowledge where we are. And for all of us, I will assert that even for everyone in the audience, no matter where you are, you're on Indigenous land. And so I would like to acknowledge that this specifically, the land that we reside upon in southwestern Montana is, around Bozeman there, it's referred to as the Valley of the Flowers, and is the traditional territories of the Siksikaits Sitapi, or the Blackfoot Confederation, the Cheyenne, Northern Cheyenne in particular, the Salish Kootenai, Absaluka or Crow, and the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. And so if you want to advance to the next slide, Olivia, we'll talk a little bit about where we are in Blackfeet country in particular. That picture from the previous slide is actually taken right up outside of Browning. And so it's looking off to the west and the north toward the Rocky Mountain front and glacier. So Blackfoot Confederacy, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, that is the Skapi-Pekani south of the border, and then the three groups that are north of the border in Canada. It actually is, and maybe if you could click another couple of times, this is one of those darn animated slides. So there's where we're at on the left there in Bozeman, down in the southern part of the territory. And on the left side, you can see a map that is kind of a traditional understanding of where the tribes are located, and the tribes and the groups that make up the Blackfoot Confederacy. And then there on the right, some work done by an ongoing project that places Native territories and privileges those territories and the names of those territories, the indigenous names of those territories throughout the United States. And you can see there in the blue, in the turquoise, that the Blackfoot territory actually spans quite a large territory, both north of Bozeman and of the Blackfeet Reservation or the Blackfeet Nation in northwestern Montana, as well as going south of Bozeman all the way down to the Yellowstone River. Okay, so you can go ahead and go advance to the next slide. So here's where we're going with this. We like to have a roadmap to show. Everybody likes a good roadmap to show where we're going. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership and the development of that partnership, a little bit about the work we have done together, which is quite expansive. And so that I won't be able to do that justice, but I'll try to give at least some, oh, sorry about that. I'll try to give some understanding of what our work has looked like in over the years, and then about the opportunity at MSU to develop the Indigenous Research Initiative. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide if you would. So the work that we have been engaged in goes back to about 2016, when we started to develop friendships and relationships around a number of different projects, one of which is the work that Lauren has been engaged with the Blackfeet Nation, that is the development of an agricultural resource management plan. And I won't even try to speak to that at this point, because it's so incredibly, I am so sorry. I thought I had everything turned off. The work that he has been doing is so incredibly holistic up there, and so in Blackfeet country. But the work that we've done as a partnership has started, as I said, started about 4 years ago, and revolved around a question particularly of what land ownership and land tenure looks like when you think about it in terms of human well-being. And so we took that question and then started delving into it and looking at, well, how do we answer that particular question? Well, we need good data. And we need good data that actually comes from Indian country, and particularly from Blackfeet or Piikani country, which is their name for themselves, Amskapi Piikani. And we couldn't find it. There wasn't any good data that came from that could really help us answer those questions around land tenure and human well-being. And so we developed a research project around that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes here. We also entered into that relationship after developing the research project itself. We went through some negotiation of data sharing agreement with the tribe and intellectual property agreements with the tribe. And so we've been through both the Blackfeet Nation's Tribal Institutional Review Board as well as council approval. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So a little bit about the Blackfeet Nation, and I believe that this might be a slide that has some more information if you click another time or two, Olivia. I could be wrong. So the Blackfeet Nation, so it's a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy, as I'd mentioned, that goes all the way into Canada. You can click a couple more times probably. sovereign tribal nation. There you see the numbers, over 17,000 members, both living on and off the reservation. Located in northwestern Montana, where I showed you at the crown of the continent. It's at the top of 5 watersheds, encompasses over 1.5 million acres. You see all those numbers on the slide: 518 miles of streams, 180 bodies of water, 51,582 acres of wetlands, and 175,000 acres of forest. So this is a diverse area, encompassing a lot of richness in a way, both natural and cultural, in that sort of Western way of thinking about things. So if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide. Blackfeet Nation has been there as a nation, as a sovereign people since 13,000 years. If you look at the archaeological record, and in Blackfeet Way, that's since time immemorial, since before anyone can remember. So this is a slightly outdated picture of the tribal leadership in Blackfeet country. It has since changed since this picture somewhat. There's some new folks on, but I put it here just mainly as a placeholder, sort of to talk about the way that tribal leadership and tribes maintain and exercise tribal sovereignty, and what that actually means in terms of practice, or in practice, which is that the Amskapi Nation maintains and exercises the authority to self-govern, to pass and enforce its own laws, and in so doing, to ensure conservation and human well-being. If we can advance to the next slide, and I think it also takes a couple of clicks, maybe one more click. There you go. So the Blackfeet Nation then, as a government and as a sovereign nation, is a steward to 80% of the large vertebrates that are here in Montana. There's a huge biodiversity in the area. They also include 8 cultural keystone species. Ini is their term, is the Piikani term for bison or buffalo. And so it includes those cultural keystones include Ini, the grizzly bear, wolverine, deer, elk, black-footed ferret, swift fox, and beaver, and then a bunch of selected global bird species, globally known bird species, including McCown's longspur, chestnut-collared longspur, ferruginous hawk, and pharaohs, and a bunch of other particularly hawks and eagles, and wetland species. Okay, you can go to the next. So our partnership, this is, we are big on these graphics, as you'll see. They're kind of fun, and they kind of help us to both visualize ourselves, what we are doing, and it helps us to communicate what we're trying to do to others in times like this in particular. So this is in one way a model for how we intend to and how we do put knowledge into action. So if you look closely at it, the Piikani value system is right there at the center, and that helps set the research agenda. And so the research only happens in partnership, and only when those partnerships actually serve tribal and community needs. And so the values themselves are driven and drive and are informed by the stakeholders, which are the community members themselves. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. Another one of the models that has actually come directly out of the community-based strategic planning that we have done as part of this partnership. This model in particular informs the current research partnership that we function under. And I think that I missed somewhere along the way, I missed a slide that had a picture of our of when we received a rather large research grant that we're working under right now from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. And so this particular model kind of shows, demonstrates, portrays the work, the way that we go after the work that we're undertaking as part of that partnership. And so, as you can see at the center there, it's driven by the Amskapi value system itself. And because of the nature of how we develop the research project, it comes out of community-based research priorities that were developed. And I'll talk a little bit about how those were developed in the next slides. But it looks, if you look closely at the different areas of research, and there's sort of, they are developed in that way in concentric circles, just to show that one can't. They're all, there's feedback going between and among each one of them. And so the community itself was the one who informed us that what's important. One of the things that is most important to them is this alignment and coordination of food production and delivery. So food sovereignty, in a word, in a term, within the Blackfeet Nation. But in order to do that, there's a need for increased internal capacity, both within the Blackfeet Nation itself and in partnership organizations, including places like Montana State University. So in order to develop that increased partnership, or that increased internal capacity, that's sort of the reason for developing an Indigenous Research Initiative, which is what we're speaking about tonight. And then that has ramifying effects and possibilities in terms of the how we can, as a partnership, begin to affect or at least support the tribes in their ability to affect actual law and policy and regulation, which is really at the heart of some of the issues around land tenure, land ownership, and human well-being as it is connected to that. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. And so when we talk about Indigenous values, this is what we're talking. This is part of what we're talking about. These were actually this set of values stated both in Pagani terms, those terms at the top that I will not try to pronounce for you, and their translations. Both of those were developed within a community-based context by Pagani elders with faculty and students at Blackfeet Community College, and we share them here with permission. And these, if you look at these, there are a variety of ways, and I could probably talk half the night about just the ways in which each one of these in its own way affects the work we do, not only what the work is, but how we do it and how we treat one another and our research partners. So we take these very seriously as sort of a check on, are we doing the work that we're doing? Are we doing it in a good way? And are we respecting not only the people in the place, but each other and anyone we come in contact with during the process of research? Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this model shows kind of the approach of that is particular to Blackfeet country, but I think that, well, it was developed there, but I think that it probably has similarities with how research gets done in other Indigenous communities. So number one there, and I won't spend a ton of time on this slide because there's a lot of information there, but number one, grounding the planning efforts and management of various sorts, everything from water to climate change to agricultural resources to urban planning to, all of it, is grounded in those Pagani values and the stewardship that is embedded in those values, the stewardship for the land and the place and the people. So those plans, it's really important in Blackfeet country, has been expressed by the community that it's really important that those plans be made in-house, that they not be sort of farmed out to or contracted out to others on the outside, that they be made, created in a distinctively Blackfeet or Piikani way. And so in order to do that, the planners, the people like Lauren Birdrattler, have to look for ways to collaborate intensively with the people. So this is a community-based research part of it. And then like I already spoke to, the issue of using high quality data. Sometimes that data then, many times actually, also has to be produced by and with and for the people who require that data. And too often, outside researchers sometimes will just use the data, say that is available through other outside researchers, like say the census or government sponsored forms of research, which are important, absolutely important, but don't necessarily reflect the kinds of questions and the kinds of concerns that you would learn if you were sort of drilling down into local conversations and local community-based kinds of research. So part of that is recognizing and honoring both traditional and modern land use and livelihoods that depend on both. And so there's a lot of ranchers up in Blackfeet country, of course, and there are some ranchers who run both cattle and buffalo, or ini. And they refer to them more as buffalo up there if they're speaking in English. So we use those terms interchangeably. And then, of course, in order to get the research done, any good research is a process of partnerships, of partnering, both with people internally to a community and externally. And so those partnerships are really, really important as long as they are Indigenous led. The plans that come out of of this holistic approach we're talking about then have to be, of course, they're useless if they're not implementable, if they aren't tied to the people who are doing them in a timeline and the resources that make them that make them possible. And then through the whole process, of course, there's a reiteration and looking back at, well, how have we been doing and what have we been doing and what can we do better, so that there is a constant effort to improve the process. Okay, you can go to the next slide. In this model, we are looking specifically at the research, the model that we learned only through community-based planning. So this came out of a 2-day intensive facilitated workshop where 50 or 60 community members participated for 2, like I said, intensive days. And they were the ones who developed and then helped us understand as researchers, both internal and researchers from the outside, helped us to understand what their goals were. And those, you see those on the left there under the Piikani strategic pillars. So it's the community members who developed these and said, these are the things that are important to us: the sustainable economic development, strengthening the cultural knowledge, increasing organizational development, investing in Piikani people, and promoting health and healing and nutrition. Now, the connectors that you see between that list of strategic goals or pillars are, those connectors are where things start to get really, really complicated, because you understand, if you look to the bottom, you understand that in order to do those things and to affect all of those areas that need to be affected and stewarded, in order to do those pillars 1 through 5, to revitalize culture and traditional food systems, that's all connected with agriculture, that's connected with health and well-being, that's connected with food and land access, all those circular elements in the middle that are all connected to each other are also obviously connected to the land. the rights and responsibilities that are connected to that land, all of which are sort of laden with these various laws and codes. And so as a sovereign nation, the tribe itself then has the ability to affect those, to influence, to change if need be, each one of those in turn. So whether it's improving probate codes, or actually some of what's missing on this are even things like food codes, creating their own food codes, resolving issues with land tenureship problems, the conservation, developing new conservation areas, and all the way over to, on the right there, exercising international rights, which the tribe actually does have in treaty, recognized by treaty, in order to do things that even Montana as a state can't do because of its proximity to the border and to brother and sister nations over the border in Canada. And so how does the nation intend to do this? Well, partly through actual strategic planning, like those ones that are listed there, although as I'll mention later on, there's a bunch more besides just those that are listed. And all of that is affected by research and research partnerships through surveys, through GIS work, through working with the tribes, with it in terms of its research agenda and institutional review. And then, of course, the partnerships with internally, both with places like Blackfeet Community College, and also externally with nonprofits and universities, and governmental organizations. Those are all super, super important. So this is a snapshot of the holistic process that we're engaged in. And every now and then I really value these kinds of graphics, because I can go back to it and look at it and say, okay, where are we at in this? And it's real helpful to try to at least explain, even to ourselves sometimes, what it is we're doing. Okay, you can move to the next slide. So just as a little snapshot again of the kind of sort of more specifically the kind of research that we're engaged with, if you look on the left there, this is a fairly recent rendering of land ownership within the Blackfeet Nation. So the green that you're looking at there those pixels are allotted lands. So those are owned in trust by individual Native people, individual Blackfeet members, enrolled members of the tribe. The purple there is owned by the tribe itself as a government, but also owned in trust. So in trust with the federal government. And so the federal government acts as a protectorate, essentially, or is supposed to act as a protectorate over those lands. But they are actually owned by the tribe and actually owned by the allotted landowners themselves in private ownership. And so that trust land ownership is one of the things that we look at. Is it's actually different from those pixels that you see that are in red, that are owned in fee. And those might be, that's just sort of regular everyday ownership that anybody might be able to hold. So those could be non-natives owning those acreages, or they could be the tribe, or they could be also tribal members owning those. It just depends. Anybody can own land in fee. Not anybody can own land in trust. Only Native people can theoretically own land in trust. And so that's just the snapshot of what the land ownership looks like on the reservation. Now, when we started to try to tease out what land tenure, or how you own your land, whether you own it in trust or in fee, or co-own it with a bunch of other people, which is referred to as fractionation, which is an issue on a lot of reservations. How you own your land affects your well-being. Well, in what ways does it affect, and how do we measure those ways that your well-being is being affected or not by your land ownership? And so we began to develop a list of of measurable criteria or things that we could actually follow over a period of time. So indicators of people's well-being. And because it has to be measurable, right? These things you can't just go in, and we can talk, and we do have qualitative research as well, but we also needed to back this up with numbers and the quantitative end of things. And so we wanted to establish this sort of basis for saying, okay, this is how people are doing now according to these, and I think we're at about 44 different indicators right now. Some of which we are following, and some of which are being kept track of by the Bureau of Indian Affairs or by the tribal government, different departments within the tribal government itself. And so what we wanted to see is, okay, we've got a baseline right now for what each one of these looks like, and let's follow these over the years and see how the tribe's many plans that are like I said, water plans for water management, agricultural resource management, climate change. How are people doing as these plans sort of change the context in which they function? And so if we drill down just a little bit deeper into this particular aspect of the research project, the writ large, this is a very small, amazingly kind of a very not small, but a very specific portion of the research project. If you go to the next slide, and just remember that green area in the bottom is allotted land, and the purple area up top is up in the northern part of the reservation is tribally owned. So this is now taking the tribe, the reservation, the nation, and see the outline there, and superimposing upon that boundary, that not very real in some ways boundary, but in other ways very real boundary of the nation itself, and superimposing that on top of the watersheds. And so this is actually, there could be, as you could recognize, as many as probably 6 major watersheds on the reservation, but are flowing through the nation, but here we're just showing it as 4. There are actually 2 down in the bottom with the Badger 2 Medicine, which you may have heard of that area. And so when you think about that southern area there, you think, okay, this is where all those, this is mostly owned by individuals. And there's a lot of other understandings that we need to talk about in order to talk a little bit more deeply about why that's important. But that's mostly individually owned down there, whereas up top is mostly owned by the tribe and some in fee. And so what we did, one of the things that we've done is to say, okay, as part of a survey that was performed a couple of years ago with local people, with tribal membership, we asked, one of the questions we asked, and this is one of those indicators from that list of 44 or more, we asked, how many nights are you actually spending out on the land? And we let them just, say, we said, doing traditional stuff, whatever that means to you as a person. That might be hunting and gathering. It might be fixing fence. It might, who knows what it is. But how many nights are you actually spending out on the land? And that's sort of, in feedback that we've gotten from community members, that's a positive thing. Like spending the night out on the land is a really positive thing, and so is kind of a measurement of well-being, of human well-being. And so what we found, and what those areas, those colors in those different watersheds indicate, is that the areas with the highest allotted land ownership, individual land ownership, are also the areas where people are spending the most time out on the land. Now, we might be able to develop arguments around that have to do with, well, just the type of land that is in these places. It's not that they can't go out onto the land that is tribally owned, but maybe they just don't want to for one reason or another, or maybe they have to go out on their own land in ways that they don't need to go out onto tribally owned land. Regardless of the reasoning behind why people are behaving the way that they do, it's just been super important to be able to say, this is what's happening. This is how people, or have at least an inkling as to how people are actually interrelating with their landscape. And so that's a kind of a little bit about the kind of research that we're doing. This is just one example. So let's go on to the next slide, and I think you can click that one more time, maybe two more times. Okay, so in the big picture, we went from the little local, fairly local picture to this great big picture of the globe, and to a recognition that is happening in a number of places around the world. I would say a little bit less so in the United States, unfortunately, than is happening elsewhere. Even if we look at Canada, it's quite a lot going on in Canada in terms of Indigenous-led conservation, because of this recognition that Indigenous peoples, as it says, protect 80% of global biodiversity, and yet occupy this very small area and are comprise a very small portion of the world's population. And yet we're able to see that species decline is actually substantially slower on lands occupied by Indigenous, lands stewarded, I should say, by Indigenous peoples. So you can go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to try to kind of pop through these pretty quickly. So because of that recognition, the Blackfeet tribe, the Blackfeet Nation, is actually exercising sovereignty in some really important ways through these various plans. As it shows there on the slide, there are 21 completed plans of natural resource management plans of one kind or another. They're all actually talking to each other because the tribe can make that happen. And so this is a really important aspect of maintaining and exercising tribal sovereignty. You can go on to the next slide, because I really actually need to get to, I'm going to flip over this slide because I think we don't quite have enough time for this, and I want to get to both speaking with Dani and Tim, but also to the opportunity at MSU with the Indigenous Research Initiative and partnerships that it might be able to form, and support of the student body and faculty and administration. One thing that I like to draw attention to, that we like to draw attention to, is that, if we could just go back one slide to that slide about truth and reconciliation and transformation. So when we talk about one slide, there you go. When we talk about truth and reconciliation, we have to remember that you can't have reconciliation if you don't first deal with the truth. And that's the truth not only of the past, but also of its ramifying effects over time. And which is to say, today's conditions of inequality and inequity, when it comes to all sorts of different things. We can drill down into that. So we can't either have true reconciliation until there is this transformation that leads actually to equality and equity. And that sort of, you can go to the next slide, that sort of helps us to understand, and maybe click one more time on that, to understand the reason behind needing an Indigenous Research Initiative, because it is one of the pieces in helping us to collaborate, as Dr. Nick Rao says at Dartmouth, to collaborate with Indigenous governments who actually have a fair amount of power, and with their communities and organizations, in order to conserve biodiversity and support all of these other rights and resources, and to help maintain those as sustainable resources. Okay, if you can advance to the next slide. So the Indigenous Research Initiative at MSU it looks kind of like this in one vision of it. This is actually something that we developed a few years ago specifically out of Native American studies, but I think it's grown beyond that. And the thinking now is in terms of having the Indigenous Research Initiative as an institute at some level that would be sort of across the entire university. And so one of the reasons that it has developed in the way that it has is partly because of this very rich partnership with between Pekani and MSU, well, the Native Land Project, which has been the primary driver at MSU for this. And another piece that has already helped with that has helped to sort of drive that development is the accreditation process that the Native American Studies Department has been going through for a couple of years now with a group called WINHEC, which is the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, which is an international body in and of itself that requires us to look at research at MSU in such a way that we have to encourage it to be in keeping with the international Indigenous standards as are being developed across the globe, Indigenous standards for Indigenous research. And you can look specifically at examples of those kinds of developments in Indigenous research in higher education by looking at, say, just Google Indigenous strategic plans at places in Canada, in Maori universities, Australia, a number of different places where there are large populations of Native people. And so the point is to ensure the relevance of research and have it be in step with the values of and objectives of Indigenous nations and urban Native organizations as well, but also in keeping with these Indigenous standards that are now global. So we're catching up with that. We're trying to catch up with that at MSU. So you can go on to the next slide. When you look at MSU, we have, oh, darn it. I did make some changes in the slide order here, so that's okay. We'll come back around to MSU's strategic plan, which is a really important piece of this. So MSU has, you can go ahead and click on through to there or so, maybe one more click, yeah. So the opportunity at MSU, if we could go back to that slide, the opportunity at MSU is driven by its own strategic plan and the need to implement that plan to fulfill the land grant mission, to embolden and increase Native student enrollment, to lead in terms of Indigenous research and scholarship, and then to expand, because you'll expand research funding if you do all those things. And as importantly, and maybe more importantly, it's also to meet these Indigenous research agendas that we have learned and others know are anyone who is working in Indian country with Native communities knows that there's a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of priorities there. And I won't read through that list. I know you can read. But so as you see from that, now think of, sort of hold that list of Indigenous research agendas in mind. And then I believe it is the next slide. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, actually click on through that to the following slide. Nope, it's not there. So sorry, go back a couple of slides. We've got to keep these Indigenous research agendas in mind as we move forward into the development of the Indigenous Research Initiative. And so in doing that, now you can just flip 2 slides ahead because we've already sort of looked at that model. And this one is, so it talks about the mission for the Indigenous Research Initiative to do research that is collaborative. So it's modeling certain kinds of research that is equitable. It's beneficial to both the tribal communities and Native communities we work with, and to us, honestly, to the partnership and to MSU. but it's driven by these Indigenous research priorities. And so there's, as you can see, there's a whole bunch of things that come out of that and would help in terms of creating and maintaining, developing and maintaining partnerships between tribes in the region, native nations in the region, and MSU to begin with, if we can establish this at MSU, and also with the tribal colleges and other institutions of higher education within the Montana University system. So some of what we're doing right now is reaching out, creating and establishing and looking for ways to maintain an advisory council. And Dani can speak probably a little bit more to that. And looking for ways to actually support the tribal institutional review leadership, which is people who are sort of in charge of what kind of research gets done within the nations. Elevating Indigenous researchers, creating better conditions for research equity. So how money gets divided up under research grants and things like that. And then, of course, supporting Indigenous leaders and practitioners who are serving those nations and leading those research agendas. I'm going to flip to the next slide. So that relevant MSU departments, you can go ahead and there might be a million, I don't know, maybe it'll just click. Oh, it's not even, there it is. Okay. So really it's like all of the disciplines at MSU are relevant in this, one way or another. Everybody, this isn't just about NAS. This isn't just about, say, education or the health fields. There's a lot of involvement already through NAS, through education, through health. What about all the other disciplines? What about all the other interests there are in whether it's physics or engineering or chemistry or anything in between? We're working right now with folks in the ag school to develop some partnerships there. But this needs to happen all the way across campus, and the Indigenous Research Initiative, with appropriate support from the university, it could really help in developing those kinds of relationships and providing opportunity for people to work with tribes, where tribes are in and Indigenous communities are in the leadership. Okay, go to the next slide now, and I think this might be, this is the one that I was looking for a little bit earlier. So this is MSU's strategic plan. Sorry, this is one piece of MSU's strategic plan, and we refer to it as the piece with the native provisions in it. So if you look at goal 3.1 the university has committed itself to increasing mutually beneficial collaborations with tribal nations, et cetera. And how is it going to measure that increase in those mutually beneficial collaborations? Well, it's going to do that by building and maintaining an inventory of current partnerships with tribal partners. It's going to work closely with partners to develop a plan to improve and increase those tribal partnerships. And it's going to enhance those partnerships with Montana tribal colleges to increase the number of graduates who come from those colleges. So there's a lot of ways in which the Indigenous Research Initiative is actually positioned to help in fulfilling these provisions that the university has committed itself to through its most recent strategic plan. And you can flip to the next one. So what have we done recently? What have we been doing with the Indigenous Research Initiative? This is a new website. It's actually live right now. If you want to go to our nativeresearch.org, you can begin to see some of the things that are being built there. The thing to remember is that the IRI is really Indigenous-led organization, right? So the needs are being expressed from outside the university. So these kinds of tools like this website is for tribal Institutional Review Board members. It's for tribal leaders and professionals and Indigenous researchers, but others can learn from it as well. And you can, if you click to the next slide, it shows a tool that has been developed through and in partnership with the Montana State University Library to do research that is specific to not only the tribes in this region, but to the research that is actually going on at MSU. So it's an attempt to sort of make the research that is happening at MSU more translatable, more apparent to people on the outside. Oftentimes, and sometimes even people within MSU are kind of going, what are we doing? Particularly when it comes to working with Indigenous nations. So that's really exciting that the website is actually up and running. The next, that's a good, you can go on to that next slide, and it's just got a nice statement from Crowfoot, a Blackfoot orator, talking about the relationship that sort of is the reason for doing all this work, is to make sure that this can continue. So if you go to the next slide, Olivia, and I believe that, okay, so this one doesn't have the panel discussion questions, which I did share then with Tim and Dani, and would hope that maybe we can just slide it over to the two of them to talk a little bit about their involvement with the IRI, what their roles have been, and what they perceive as being the need from a student's perspective, how they perceive the need for an organization like the IRI at MSU.
Sure, and I'm not entirely sure how much time we have left.
I think she said we can go on till 7:15.
Okay. This is Dani. So far, I think that being a part of IRI has been like really critical for my own like development within the institution, because I see it as kind of a platform to build on equity and education for Indigenous people. And so, like, how does any of this relate to you, right? How does any of this relate to you as an honors student? How does any of this, like, why does it matter, right? And for me, like, as a student, I see this as a great opportunity for building relationships. So first and foremost, for the IRI, it's about building long-lasting relationships, especially with non, because we need to work together to make sure that like everything that we have just talked about will succeed, because there's so many different layers that's intertwined in here that we need to work together. And so something that I've seen through my own, because I did my undergrad at MSU, is just that that folks just aren't aware that there's all of this history, all of this governance that resides here in Montana, that resides anywhere in other states, really, within reservations and tribal members, and sovereignty between the relationship between the United States and tribes. And so really, truly, for me, my goal is to assure that we're educating folks, who are coming here, and letting them understand that there's so much more going on here on this land, and that if we can advocate for each other, that we can get so more accomplished. And so I think this is a great opportunity for especially you as students to be advocates for this process, and also advocate for yourself, to demand more diversity within your studies, and to get to build relationships with more than just the people that you're in classes with, because there's so much rich history and culture that's present here. And I feel like you guys are only getting exposed to just a small part of that. And so I think the IRI is providing kind of a space so that we can build relationships with each other and educate each other and share resources and talk about how, you know, instead of having this idea of what kind of research can be done in Indian country and how you can be a part of that, we're trying to change the conversation into, well, what are the priorities already and how can I contribute? Because it's not about me or you having an idea. It's more of what is your expertise and how you can um, contribute to that, right? Because we already know what we need to be working on. We already have plans. We already have plenty of ideas. But now it's how can we work together to get these things accomplished? And so it's more bringing a, a highlight to that so that we can work better together and build long standing relationships with each other. And so that's, you know, being a part of the IRI, like my kind of caveat is education, but truly it's opened my eyes to just being a part of every little piece of the pie, right? Like the whole circle in general. It's not just education. It's everything that evolves around education from how you grow up, the food you eat, the resources you have within healthcare, you know, and so many more things that you realize that all of these things are connected, and it's a lot to take on, but it's necessary. And so what's great about this is like I've been able to build relationships with people who are doing incredible work and contributing to that. So that's where I'm going to hand over the conversation to Tim, because Tim is someone that I met through a math class, who is doing incredible work, and it's an honor to be able to know like people like Tim who are doing this great work, and to rely on each other and to get to know each other and build relationships with each other. And so it just like is totally expanding, also like the people that we work with and our ideas, and you know just building upon building, and strengthening the things that need to happen. So that's how it affects me, in a nutshell, I guess. And I really want you guys to talk with Tim too, because or hear from Tim, because I really value the work that Tim does and what he has been working on in Indian country, especially from a non-native perspective.
Thanks, Dani.
Yeah, you bet.
So let's see, the two questions that Kristin delivered to our inboxes. The first one,
Tim, I think you're muted. Darn it. You have to repeat all of that.
sorry about that. Okay, going back to starting off with a thanks to Dani for that very thoughtful introduction to the IRI and to the partnerships that are emerging in that context. So the two questions that Kristin sent to us, the first one was, what is your role at the IRI? And to that, I would say that I'm still learning what my role is at the IRI. So last year, as a research assistant working for Kristin, I took some deep dives into federal Indian policy, into fractionation, into different policy areas that when you get into them, you start going through these rabbit holes of history and law and a number of other related disciplines. So you kind of just have to, you know, put your headlamp on and start making your way around in the dark, especially since I was coming into that without hardly any prior knowledge about these subject areas. And then recently, I've been writing and sharing thoughts and emails with other and participating in meetings with other people in the IRI, and trying to both work out some of my own understandings, but also trying to kind of poke and prod other people to develop their understandings. But then going back to my first response, or one of my first responses, and that's just to say that really, as far as my role goes at the IRI, it's something I'm still learning about. And the IRI, as I'm sure you all now know, is doing all kinds of work and has so many different partnerships and so many things going on that I'm still learning so much of that it's hard for me to even get any perspective on my own role and all of that. So I'm just super appreciative that I've been able to participate in that. And then also just to go a little further in that, I would second everything Dani said about creating spaces for relationship and partnership and for learning from one another, because that's what classroom spaces are for. They're really special. They're really important. And kind of transitioning now to the second question, which was, in your experience, why is the IRI needed at MSU? And that's partially my answer there as well. And just that these spaces are so important to have so many different kinds of conversations and to learn things that, are important, as you could see from Kristin's presentation, on so many different levels. They're important individually and person-to-person relations. They're important institutionally. And they're important at national and large-scale social levels for the reasons that Kristin mentioned under the slide about truth and reconciliation and transforming relationships. And really, if I had to give a short answer to why the IRI at MSU is important and necessary, it's for those reasons. It's because these relationships between Native and non-Native, or Indigenous and non-Indigenous persons, they need to transform and evolve and to move forward in a way that builds excellent relations between them. And in order to do that, you need spaces that are set aside to have really complicated, difficult, challenging, learning edge building conversations. And so that's my elevator pitch for why the IRI at MSU is necessary. And that only represents, that's just where I'm at right now with my learning and how I am conceiving of things. So I'm sure you'll, if you talk to other people, you'll get different or slightly different answers. And it's just been a wonderful experience over the last year to get to know people like Dani and to sit in classrooms with them and just go deep and go real deep into the weeds on some really fascinating subjects. And after many years of being in the educational system, I'm at a place now where I'm being exposed to some of this stuff for the first time. And I think that also raises some interesting questions and other conversations that maybe, we can have at some other time. But the fact that I'm learning so many of these things and being in these situations now, not at the beginning of my academic time, but here many, many years later, I wish that these spaces had existed a long time ago. And I really hope that, just to echo what Dani said, I really hope that as students, I'm not sure, I don't know any of you, and I can't, I just see your initials, so I don't know who you are, but I really hope that you will explore and push your learning edge, and that you will engage with these subjects and topics, because they will advance you educationally and individually and professionally in all the right ways. So that's I guess my response to the questions. Thank you for giving me a second to talk about them.
Thank you both. Dani, this is Kristin. Thank you for coming and doing this on fairly short notice. So
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I appreciate both of you more than you know. And I don't know, Olivia, is there any time left for, I think we've used up our time more than almost, but I don't know if you have time for any questions or discussion.
Yeah, so with the time that we do have left, anyone that's viewing right now, if you guys have any questions or would like to ask a question, we just ask that you turn on your camera and ask a question. You're also welcome to ask in the chat box, but we do recommend that we see your guys' beautiful faces and ask questions wherever you like.
And just while we're kind of waiting for some questions, I just want to put out there that, you know, like you guys have a lot of power and voice as far as what you demand and want out of your education. And so definitely, like, this is a great opportunity for you to push the boundaries. Like, if you don't think that you're getting what you need, like, voice that and challenge the system, because there's so many things, like Tim was saying, that he had never been exposed to until this point in his career, and he's now a PhD student, right? And so I just want to really encourage you guys to seek that diversity and make sure that you guys are getting exactly what you need, because this is your time. This is your time to make sure that that you're developing and getting your um, or you're getting challenged enough to continue to learn and do great things. And so just know that your voice is really powerful. And um, yeah, I just want to put that out there, because I didn't really know that or learn that until later on in my educational career. And I just want to plant that seed so that you guys know truly um that you do have that power, and you have any time to access that right to demand great education. So I just want to put that out there for you.
Do you have any specific suggestions for how students can get involved?
Well, if they're interested in anything in particular in research projects, we can always put put students to work and plug people in. And as you can see, there's a wide range of issues that are of interest in Indian country and things that need to be worked on. So if people want to do some meaningful research, they can send them my way. Lauren is usually more. Like I said, he's having some electronics issues going on, so he's not real available right now. But he would be, once he gets back online. He'll be also. He is the CATS chair for Native American Studies, and so he's a great one to reach out to. So yeah, I won't put any of that on Dani or Tim. They have plenty to do already.
Yeah, and I think too, just getting involved in little ways. There is the American Indian Council that's in Wilson, and that's always a really good place to start to kind of get to know people and learn more about the culture. It's always open to anyone, and it's very welcoming. So if that's just kind of a place you want to get involved, that's just to build your comfortability around some of these issues or whatever. That's a really great place to start. And that's in Wilson, room 1, which is downstairs in the only room in Wilson that's downstairs in the garden level.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good idea. Thank you, Dani.
For those of you that are watching and are really interested in getting involved, if you guys can always reach out to Honors Presents, and we can send you to Dr. Kristin Ruppel's way by sending your email to, or her email to you guys. And if you guys have any more questions, because I don't know if anyone's been asking in the chat yet, but if you guys do have any questions that are still on your mind that you would like to talk more about, just contact us and we can send you her way. So if there's no other questions, thank you so much to Kristin, Dani, and Tim for taking the time to bring awareness about these relationships, issues, and efforts that's happening all across Montana and in the lives of Indigenous tribes. So thank you so much again for taking the time to share this with us this evening.
You bet.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thank you all for speaking. And for students that are still here, if you're having difficulty with the link and it's blank instead of taking you to the Cats Connect page, please send Honors Presents an email. Otherwise, there's no way to keep track of you. So please just be on top of your own credits. But thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for all your work organizing.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.